Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured, why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description and every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 6, Episode 4 of FX's Snowfall, entitled Projects Boy. I think pretty clearly this episode title, well, I'm not going to say pretty clearly, but I firmly believe the episode title is referring to Leon. I'm not going to get into too much about why it's called that or why that refers to Leon, because I have a whole section of this video dedicated to talking about what I think this episode does with the Leon character. So I'm going to save that for that portion. What I want to start with, though, I want to start by acknowledging the immediate debunking of my Alton theory from last week. I saw somebody told me that there was like, oh, no, it's not, Alton's not dead or whatever. I'm like, yeah, whatever, we'll see. But yeah, this episode, it's almost like this episode watched my video from last week. It was like, oh, he don't know what the fuck he talking about. Let's debunk that shit right off top. I thought it was a good theory, and there's still a part of me that believes Alton is alive, or that they just handled his death sloppily. I think one of those things is true. Same with Peaches. I feel like the Peaches thing is either not resolved yet, or they did a shitty job with closing out the Peaches character. But the fact that Peaches has been missing this season, and we know that, I at least think we know that Peaches didn't just bail like that. I think there's going to be something there. But I am fully willing to hold the L right now for being wrong about the Alton thing. Seems pretty clear and definitive that I was wrong. So let's talk about what happened. It turns out the opening scene here immediately answers my query from last week about what was up with the scene where Veronique's mom is like, he'll be out of his office tomorrow and we'll get the files we need, because nothing ever came from that. And actually, side note, this was a compliment that I gave Snowfall in Season 4 that I didn't give in Season 5, but after 4 episodes I'm willing to give now. The show is back to giving a fuck about every scene. Every scene has mattered so far. And even when you have a scene like that one last week where they have the thing about, oh, he's going to be out of his office tomorrow and we'll have his files. And if you're paying attention, you're like, whose office? What files? What is this plan? All this kind of shit, right? Immediately they come back in this episode and start with answering that question. And another show I watch, I'm drawing a blank on it right now, is doing that too. Where they're like, oh, Mayor of Kingstown. Mayor of Kingstown will do that, where they'll have scenes in an episode where you're just kind of like, well, what the fuck was that about? And then the scene becomes relevant later. So Snowfall is back on its not wasting scene shit. But moving forward, we start this episode with answering my question from last week about the office and whose files or whatever. So it turns out that the plan was to lure Teddy's partner, and I learned his name this time. His name's William. Teddy's accomplice in stealing Franklin's money. The plan was to lure him out of his office. Veronique's mom is going to meet with this guy, and just to keep him out of the office, while Veronique runs this plan where she pretends to be like with the FBI to kind of spook his secretary into opening his safe so she can photograph all his files. And the plan works. And Veronique even like distracts William when he's coming back to give the secretary more time to get in. She's a hustler, man. She was smart. She played it good. So no Alta for now. Just William. And I am still really hung up on Veronique's mom saying that Teddy would need help impersonating Franklin. Now, I'm gonna let it go for now, but I think whatever it is that William did or took or photographed or whatever is probably what helped him impersonate Franklin. Like maybe he needed his social security number, for instance, as opposed to a much more literal version of that I assumed, which of course isn't Alton dressed up as Franklin, but maybe something involving like DNA or something like that, where maybe where Alton had some sort of Alton's relationship to Franklin, allowed him to do something that he wouldn't be able to do otherwise, some sort of verification. But that was me doing a whole fucking lot, and I'm willing to let it go now, and I'm gonna hold that L. Especially because I get a lot of fucking W's. So I hold the L. If you're someone who watches MMA, I'm going to be recording another Fight Talk soon, and we're going to be talking about some W's I got there. But moving on, let's talk about this episode, because I think this one did some interesting moves to position characters in interesting places. So I want to talk about the major players in this episode and how the chessboard looks after 4 episodes and why. And I want to start with Franklin, because like I said earlier, they got photographic evidence that this William guy helped Teddy move the money. But they don't know where it is presently because there's a withdrawal they couldn't trace, and they all assume like, okay, it's probably Teddy taking the money out, whatever, right? And Franklin blows up after being greeted with the earth-shattering news. He's gonna need Teddy to get his money back and that water is fucking wet. And I just want to take a moment to talk about how much I love when Franklin gets angry. Like, there are one-offs every now and then, with my favorite being the rant in the car with Leon in season 3, where Leon was getting into it with Man-Boy and it fucked up some business shit. And he's like, I'm not gonna let you fuck this up. I built this brick by brick, all that kind of shit. That rant, that was my number one moment on Snowfall until the fucking Franklin and Jerome conversation that ended episode 2. But clearly it's up there, right? Well, we got 3 of those moments in this episode. The one with the mom that I just talked about, is water fucking, well, I didn't talk about it, I alluded to it, but is water fucking wet, like that shit. Love that. When he puts that Todd guy's face to the stove, and yes, we're going to talk about that too, and then later in that same scene when he kicks everyone out, loved it. But back to the scene with Veronique and her mom. So Veronique says they have a plan B, and Franklin says, y'all going to go out there? And V's mom was like, oh, we were, but I'm feeling a little unmotivated. But then later in the episode, we see Veronique and her mom arrive in Kansas, and I'm super curious about what Plan B is. I think this is, again, another situation where they're setting the stage for something. I'm supposed to be wondering what they're up to, and then maybe we're going to see what they're up to at the very beginning of episode 5. So, curious to see what's going on there. And then also, I see both sides of Franklin's frustration. Like, Veronique's mom knows the process. I really should learn her name. Veronique's mom knows the process, right? But he doesn't. And she says that any amount of information is useful, which is true. Like, before, they were theorizing. Now they know. But Franklin's right to be mad, too. He says it's been like 3 weeks, apparently, and he's been led to believe that the key to finding Teddy was finding this middleman, this extra person. They find the guy, they run off this plan, they get the files, and all he really walks away with is confirmation that this guy is involved. So I see why Franklin would be pissed. Not to mention, we're talking about $73 million. Like, I'd be as angry as Franklin is if some motherfucker stole 73 regular fucking dollars from me. Not 73 million. So 3 weeks to get to this point, I could see why he'd be a little impatient. Like, I'd be hot too, but I am known to have an anger problem. That's why my avatar is what it is. The YouTube avatar. But another question of mine that I had last week that got answered in this episode is how Franklin is continuing to make money since he burned the bridges with Dion. Well, we learned this week that Kane took up the offer, and he is working for Franklin. But apparently he's not making enough money, so Franklin wants to investigate his cookhouses to make sure everything's running well. And Kane eventually reluctantly agrees to this, and Franklin shows up at the cookhouse. And this dude named Todd immediately acknowledges that he knows who Franklin is, but does not give any kind of fuck about anybody named Saint, and he ain't about to tell him how to cook. And then Franklin promptly shows him how to cook by sauteing his face to a nice golden brown with a nice crispy crunch. But Todd has a very eventful episode, this Todd guy. I like how they have a Todd that's really into drugs, like Breaking Bad, because there's another thing that happens in this episode that's like Breaking Bad that I'm going to talk about in my thoughts. But after Franklin gives Todd a nice sear, Todd goes to Kane to ask permission to go after Franklin. And I love how Kane tells him that Franklin is a hoe. He's like, hoes make money. Because the reality of the situation is Kane is very much the hoe in this relationship. Like, it's very literally the opposite. Kane is the hoe, but whatever. I still thought it was funny. But after Kane rejects him, Todd goes to Jerome and Louie, who are all ears when he walks in with "fuck Kane and your ugly ass nephew." Like, he's coming in with that kind of message. Jerome and Louie are all ears. And then we later see a drive-by at Kane's house that him and Franklin barely escaped from. But the moment when Franklin realizes one of the people is Todd, man, that shit had me dying, dog. Like, Franklin had a really funny fucking episode for me, man. I don't know if that shit is meant to be as funny as it is to me, but the way Franklin reacted to seeing that Todd was one of the assailants was just... I fucking loved it, man. This is a good episode for Franklin, man. He had me rolling. Moving on to Leon, the project boy. He has two storylines that involve in this episode as well. I didn't cite that Franklin had two, but there was the thing with Veronique and all the shit with the money and whatnot. And then the thing with Todd and Kane and the cookhouse and all that kind of shit. So Franklin kind of had two plot lines in this episode, and Leon does as well. And I'm going to start with the shorter one because I think the direction it's going is pretty clear. And I also don't think it's going to take that long for it to happen. So be ready for a crazy theory from me, right? Like, this one's not as crazy as the Alton theory. I still think the Alton theory was good, but whatever, right? But the Alton theory was a bit of a reach, I admit. This one isn't. Like, this is one where I'd be more surprised and impressed if it doesn't play out the way that I'm thinking it's going to play out. Because the way I think it's going to play out is so fucking tired. But I'm also willing to let it go. So let's talk about it. So since Leon has returned, he's trying to make up for all the shit he did in his past by doing good in the projects right now. Like, he wants the street lights back on in the playground area. But Dion believes that no street lights give the dealers better cover. And Leon's like, no, that's not true. We already established that's not true in the past. But then Leon also seems to take up this like mentorship role with Einstein. And that I feel like that's his bigger wholesome purpose. Like, getting the streetlights back on, it's like, okay, I'm gonna do the little things. But like, I feel like Einstein is like his project, right? He talked up the idea of college to him. And throughout the episode, we can see that Einstein is, I think, very clearly not a fan of remaining in the drug dealer lifestyle. And he's way more interested in going to college. You know, in one scene, he's looking at a college application while he's counting money and whatnot. And Dion comes in and actually speaks some truth to him. It's just not the best advice. But he essentially asks Einstein kind of like, why you want to go to college so much when you already smarter than the professors and you already are set for life financially? Like, the whole goal of going to college is to end up where you are right now. And I'm kind of like, damn, that's a good ass point. But for Einstein, it's not about I'm going to college so I can make money. He doesn't want to be in this violent fucking business. He just wants to learn like any fucking nerd would, including myself. Like, I like learning shit because I like flexing in front of my family when Jeopardy is on. So, like, I get that shit, right? But Dion did make a good point. I ain't gonna lie. But we see more evidence of this at the end when Dion is shooting out the lights after Leon got him replaced. Like, when he starts shooting, like, we don't see him, we just hear it because we're inside because Einstein and Wanda and Leon are filling out a fucking college application. They don't explicitly say it, but you could tell he's doing, like, the essay portion because they're talking about writing. And when the gunfire starts, the look on Einstein's face, he's like, oh my God, I'm so fucking sick of all this fucking gunfire in the fucking projects. Like, you can tell Einstein is fully fed up, right? And this leads me to believe that Einstein is going to die at some point very soon. and there's likely gonna be like a college acceptance letter that's gonna get opened like over his body, like as he's like taking his last breath. It's like, you got into University of Phoenix. but this is a very textbook and overused strategy though, right? It's the exact same thing we saw in Boys in the Hood with Ricky, right? So much so though that given like the time period that this show takes place and the location, I almost feel like if it plays out that way, I wouldn't even hold it against the show. Like, oh, you stole that from Boys in the Hood. Like, I wouldn't even look at it as like a stealing. I would kind of look at it more as paying homage. Because it's so similar right down to the time period and location. Like, yes, Boys in the Hood came out like 93 or whatever, and this is like 86. But like, that's just nitpicky at this point. So if it does play out like that, even down to like the corny aspect of like, oh shit, here's your University of Phoenix acceptance letter, like as he expires, I'm willing to let it go. You know, it's kind of the same as those movies too, where like the cop, it's like he's like, this is my last day. I retire after this, and then me and the wife are gonna go see the world, and then he gets killed on the job on that last day. Like that's this, I think, and that's likely Einstein's fate. But like I said, I'm cool with it if it actually does if it leans really hard into being like Boys in the Hood. I am gonna look at it as like, okay, now you're paying homage. Like if they don't lean into it that hard, then I'm gonna feel like, okay, you just weren't creative. Normally I don't give a pass for something like that, but like I said, it's so close to Boys in the Hood that I kind of look like, all right, well maybe this is okay. But again, that's assuming I'm right. I might not be, as we've established already quite a bit so far. But then I also want to talk about how Leon is positioning himself in this war, because this entire episode has several moments that are meant to pit Leon against Dion. Bars. In addition to the streetlight situation, you also have the conflicting advice that Einstein is receiving, the version that Dion is giving him versus the version that Leon is giving him. Also take into account the advice that Dion is giving him is likely going to result in Einstein's death. But then you also have Dion's constant and blatant disrespect toward Wanda in this episode too. That's just meant to, and the disrespect to Wanda is not just the disrespect to Wanda, because he's super blatant with it. Like right in front of Leon to his face so he could hear it. So it's like, in the manner in which he's disrespecting Wanda, he's also disrespecting Leon in a much more overt way. Like any disrespect to Leon's wife is disrespect to Leon, but the way that Dion's doing it is super extra disrespectful to Leon. And that's why this episode ends with Leon beating the ever-loving shit out of Dion. And, I expect this to only amplify the beef between Leon and Dion, but also, if Leon essentially does take over as, being in charge in the projects, that project boy that he is, right? The episode title, even though it's not technically him, even though it's not technically him choosing a side like Franklin advised him to do, it's pretty squarely putting him on the Franklin side of things opposite Jerome, Louis, and Dion. So I think that's pretty interesting too, that he's coming back to do good, but now I feel like Leon's kind of moving back into that role, which again, I think I said this in a previous video, makes me worried for Leon. It's the same concept with Einstein. I'm saying that Einstein's going to die because of how bad he wants to get out, and I'm saying Leon's going to die because of how bad he doesn't want to go back. And now it seems like he's kind of working his way back in. I don't know. Leon's not looking much longer for this world. And then lastly, I want to talk about the Teddy and Gustavo plotline. A lot of interesting stuff happening there too. Again, when I'm talking about not wasting a scene, like I've watched this episode. I think I only watched this one twice, but I've watched the first three. I think I might have watched them 3 times. And on the second watch, every time I'm like, oh, that scene that I didn't think was that important on first watch, I now see how important it is. So yeah, like I said, no scenes are wasted here. And I think that's why this video is important for those of you watching. I feel like I'm doing a good job of covering all the things that I think this show does that really only reward people who are paying close attention. So, like I said, Teddy Gustavo, last week, I said I found the reveal of that piece of paper in the boat to be underwhelming, given how intense that scene was and all the build up to that, only to inform us of something we already knew. Like, I'm like, what, is the sun hot? Is water fucking wet? I already know the Russians want Teddy. But But what is important about that scene was that Teddy now knows that the Russians are, at the very least, involved in this plot. And Ruben finds out from his guy, who I don't know this guy's name, but he finds out about the arms deal that Teddy and Gustavo shot up, and they formulate this plan to kind of accelerate their timeline by raiding Teddy's warehouse with ideally him and his boss in it. And the problem with that is, though, that if you do that raid and you don't get what you need, now essentially you've blown your cover. So it's like they're trying to decide, okay, well now Teddy knows, so we have to move a little bit faster because now he's kind of onto us. But at the same time, if we do move it up and we don't get what we need, we're really fucked on catching them. So it's a big dilemma. And Ruben says he wants to move on from Sissy and Franklin. He wants to focus on Gustavo. And we see that play out in a later scene where he approaches Gustavo at a bar and essentially reveals everything that's going on. And I love how the position that Gustavo is now in after this episode. He meets with the DEA, his DEA people that he's informing for in this episode as well. And it's pretty much the same conversation. So now Gustavo has the DEA coming to him like, hey, the goal is to catch Teddy. Let's set him up to catch him in his warehouse. And then Ruben and the KGB are in Gustavo's ear like, hey, the goal is to catch Teddy. Let's set him up to catch him in his warehouse. Like, I feel like in the next episode, Gustavo is somehow going to get Teddy and whoever into the warehouse at the same time. And the DEA and the KGB are going to show up and end up like, I don't know, fighting with each other so much, not knowing whose side who is on. And Teddy's probably going to escape. And now he's going to know everybody that's onto him. That's probably what's going to end up happening over the next episode or two. But I still like this situation that Gustavo's in. And then even Franklin is like, hey, the goal is to catch Teddy. He is saying that, but he's not saying that we got to set him up to catch him on his warehouse. But still, that's a lot of pressure for also. And then to top it all off, Teddy is now officially suspicious of him, right? Like they planted the seeds, like having Teddy make weird faces, kind of like, they planted that seed. But he looks at him very strangely when they both leave the warehouse in this episode. And then after the bar scene with Ruben, we see Teddy outside photographing Ruben. So now I think we're meant to understand that, one, he was suspicious enough of Gustavo to follow him to that bar. Two, now he sees Ruben, the guy who was involved in the Avi shit, who he thought was involved in kidnapping Parissa, who he has a sketch of because of Parissa. He sees that guy walking out of the same bar that he presumably saw Gustavo go into. And the wild thing about that is he's now going to assume, oh, Gustavo and that guy who's after me are working together, he has every reason to believe that, but he doesn't know that Gustavo didn't know that Ruben was going to show up there. That was a surprise to Gustavo too. But it doesn't matter what the reality is. It doesn't matter what the reality is. Teddy believes, he should, at least I think that's what we're meant to believe, that Gustavo has betrayed him and is now working with Ruben. So yeah, I think Gustavo's pretty fucked right now. So that puts Gustavo, Leon, and Einstein as my... Oh no, I predicted a Franklin death too. So basically, I think everybody gonna die before the end of the season. So that's all I have for this episode as a whole, but I do have a couple of quick thoughts before I wrap up. I mentioned earlier that they did some stuff that was like Breaking Bad. Did you guys notice that they put cameras in like the safe dial and in the keyhole in that opening scene so that when the secretary turned the safe dial, the like camera rotated, and when she put her key into the keyhole rotated. Putting cameras in weird places like that's very much I don't want to say a Breaking Bad move. It's a Vince Gilligan move. They did it on Breaking Bad. They did it on Better Call Saul. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I would call that homage because I don't know if they... I didn't feel like homage. It just felt like they just did it just to do it. Something that I do think is probably homage is when Franklin goes to see Kane. He goes in a suit, and Kane says he's dressed like he's the CEO of the ROCK. And I'm like, I see that Jay-Z reference. I hated the scene between Teddy and Parissa. The only thing I didn't like in this episode, she's fucking awful. He asked her to move in with him, and she never actually agrees or disagrees. She just speaks coy about it and speaks in riddles and never actually answers the fucking question. And it's the same problem that I think Mayfair Witches had, which is that show thought the more mysterious they make things, the more interesting it is, when really it's just annoying and stupid. That's how I look at Parissa. She's annoying and stupid, and she doesn't, and she's like that because they think it's cute to make her mysterious. And like, that's not endearing to me. She's obnoxious to me. Like, she recommends that Teddy leave the country with Franklin's money. And Teddy's like, if I do that, are you going to come with me? And she's like, I wrote down the quote. Ask me when it happens and we'll see. Can you answer one fucking question, Parissa? Just one fucking question. Teddy asked her all yes or no questions and she don't answer not a goddamn one of them. Fucking hate Parissa. And then lastly, when Franklin goes into the cookhouse, I don't know if it was Todd that said this. I think the character had his, like, it was kind of shadowy. I couldn't tell who it was. But someone called him Mr. Belvedere. And I feel like a lot of people who watch the show now in 2023 aren't gonna get that reference, but that was a cold joke for 1986 or whatever the fuck year it was. Like, yo, you really got him with that one. That was a cold little joke, man. You cooked him with that. And if that was Todd, then he got cooked back. So that's all I got for episode 4. I will see you guys next week for episode 5, and until then, peace.